The Mill City Museum is facing a problem. The Twin Cities is overflowing with activities for tourists and locals alike, including a lively restaurant scene and many other activities that fight for consumer attention, most of which are all placed in convenient locations. Among the most popular is the Twins Stadium, Guthrie Theater, Mall of America, Minneapolis Institute of Art, Science Museum, Como Zoo, Children's Museum, and the list goes on. The competition is tough as some of these activities are free and the Mill City Museum is not. To tackle this issue, we must first set our objectives. The Mill City Museum would like to focus on 1. Increasing attendance by 10% using digital marketing, and 2. Capturing more emails to grow their database for future marketing opportunities and greater consumer reach. Our team thinks that it is also important to focus on repeat attendance for loyal customers. These objectives are what will lead us through our research and ultimately help us define our recommendations for the Mill City Museum. Before moving on, let's discuss our budget. To tackle these objectives, we have about $5,000 to $25,000 to spend. To bring in greater attendance, the Mill City Museum should draw inspiration from the term museuming, the experience of visiting a museum or multiple museums. Museums are social by nature. Often visitors go to museums to see and be seen. It is part of the experience. When people museum, they expect a certain level of treatment and an elevation of their experience. Most importantly, when thinking about this term, the museum should focus on bettering the visiting experience and treatment level of their customers. Ultimately, the museum is fighting for a share of the customer's precious time. This time that the museum is fighting for is also being contended for by other Minneapolis hotspots, like the Twins, the Vikings, and the Minnesota State Fair, and even its competitor next door, the Guthrie Theater. All of these venues scored higher than the Mill City Museum on a consumer preference matrix that we created. In fact, you'll see from this competition matrix, the Mill City Museum has the lowest perceived value for the competing cheap entertainment venues in Minneapolis. It was also considered the least fun or exciting of the same competing cheap entertainment venues in Minneapolis. From this perception survey, we found a positive correlation between alcohol consumption and perceived fun interest alignment. The Mill City Museum performed in the bottom 30% of all 3 of these metrics. Overall, these metrics display consumers' preferences to forego the Mill City Museum in favor of other Minneapolis fixtures. To better understand what customers are interested in going to for museums, we looked into national consumer survey data to personify the Mill City Museum's target market. What we found was that of the roughly 52 million museum goers each year, 5% or 2.6 million of them can be personified as the museum-going Melissa. Let's meet Melissa. Melissa is a white female. She is married and between the ages of 35 and 44 and has at least 1 kid between the ages of 2 and 11. Museum-going Melissa also enjoys spending her free time dining out, 78.6% of which of them agreed to this. 73.1% of them agreed that baking for fun was interesting. 78.3% of them agreed that reading books was interesting. And 81.8% agreed that listening to music was of interest to them. To address these desires for our social media campaign, we found that 73.6% of these consumers have used Facebook in the past 7 days. 38.2% of them used YouTube in the past 7 days, and 29.4% of them used Pinterest in the past 7 days. Focusing specifically on events, 63% of Facebook users use that platform to hear about events, and 84% of consumers repurchase a product promoted at an event that after their first purchase. When surveyed on their preferences regarding communications, 44.1% of museum-going Melissas disliked receiving emails about products and services. Contrast this with our earlier statistics that 73.6% of them like to receive information via Facebook. To increase attendance of this market, Mill City Museum and the Minnesota Historical Society in general should put communication efforts onto Facebook. Sadly, Marketing Sherpa's research shows that email marketing databases degrade by about 22.5% every year. However, it is important to realize that this is only 5% of museum goers and not to abandon email marketing efforts completely. Instead, to strengthen the current emails for consumers who do appreciate them, we recommend to focus on these top tricks for effective emails. First being, keeping the copy and design short and simple. The second, include links to social media sites. The third, monitor success, like what is working and what drives more opens. For our events, we believe the idea of a cooking/baking class will be ultimately effective as it aligns with our target consumers' interests. We believe that this event should be free for members and reduce costs for non-members $15 per person. For family events, we believe that we should offer activities for kids on weekends for a place for parents to bring their children for entertainment, perhaps crafts. Our event budget would be $20,000. We would allocate $7,000 to renovating the kitchen space to accommodate guests and these cooking-baking events. The other $13,000 will be invested in doing bi-monthly adult and family-oriented events, including costs of marketing and employee time. For the communication, we believe that for museum-going Melissa's market, we should focus on social media channels that work best for this market, these being Facebook, YouTube, and Pinterest. We believe that it would also be somewhat effective to pay for ads on these social media platforms. For others, we would suggest working on improving the email newsletter to keep those who do not read engaged and feel connected to the MNHS, even when they're not at the museum. The budget for communication efforts would be $5,000. This money would be spent on time updating the newsletter and sponsored ads on social media channels. To gauge the effectiveness of our campaign, we would want the Minnesota Historical Society to measure the attendance rate changes, the measure in membership rate changes, the measurement of open rates on email newsletters to see if changes are improving interactions, and the measurement of social media engagement by target audiences. The Middle City Museum should work to engage new visitors through events, both adults and family-oriented, and its communication by increasing social media content for the younger market and improving its email newsletter for all audiences. Through all marketing efforts, the Mill City Museum should keep its largest segmented market of museum-going Melissa in mind and how its efforts will either attract or deter this consumer.